Hello everyone, please press subscribe, press follow, press the bell so you don't miss any new clips. Alchemy Emperor of the Divine Tao. Author by Flying Alone. Audio novels by Novelist. Alchemy Emperor of the Divine Tao. Chapter 106, Doubt. Yuan Gang repeatedly begged for mercy, yet who would really take to heart such a minor character? In the end, he could only leave in defeat. The other members of the staff all wanted to break into applause out of happiness. This Yuan Gang was a vile character who had just gotten a bit of success recently, yet was arrogant without limits. They all felt that he deserved this kind of ending. When Xiao Ying saw Ling Han, Fu Yuansheng, and the others disappear around the corner, she could not help revealing an infatuated expression. A young girl like her naturally did not lack a romantic imagination. However, she knew that there was too big a gulf between Ling Han and herself in terms of status, so she was just fantasizing a bit. Her heart was filled with gratitude, because she had received a personal acknowledgement from Fu Yuansheng. Her position in this Heaven's Medicine Pavilion would be unshakable. For Ling Han, this was only a very small matter, and when he arrived at Fu Yuansheng's study, he had completely put the earlier incident out of his mind. He did not want to waste any time, and so voiced out his intention to borrow some ingredients from Fu Yuansheng. Fu Yuansheng nodded and waved his hand. Of course, him waving his hand did not mean that he was refusing Ling Han's request, but that the medicinal ingredients would be a gift to Ling Han instead of a loan. What a joke, this was a grandmaster alchemist. To be able to supply alchemical ingredients for Ling Han was his honor. What need was there for Ling Han to pay them back? Ling Han did not act modest, and said, "How about this? I will concoct an alchemical pill here, and you all can observe the way I do it." He had decided to enact a specific alchemist skill. This was far from the level of the Three Fire Guide, but would be indescribably valuable to Fu Yuansheng and the others. Good. But I would have to ask you to wait for a moment, to allow me to call some other people here to observe, if that's all right. Fu Yuansheng asked cautiously. It would be best if there were more alchemists here to observe and benefit from such a great opportunity. They would be able to improve together. Moreover, the more people there were, then the more possible it would be for them to observe clearly that alchemist skill of Ling Han. Afterwards, they'd be able to confirm and double-check with one another, so they would not easily forget any details. Zhu Hixin and Zhang Weishan immediately looked a little guilty. The gazes they directed at Fu Yuansheng were filled with respect, because they had only thought of themselves just now, and had not even taken others into consideration. He truly deserved the name of Grandmaster. He was indeed a person who thought of the bigger picture. Ling Han smiled, and said, "You can, but it would not be appropriate for there to be more than 10 people." "I understand." Fu Yuansheng hurriedly excused himself and left. Meanwhile, Ling Han began to converse with Zhu Hixin and Zhang Weishan. Xuanhuan stood at one side, unable to join in the conversation, obviously looking extremely bored. She was currently engaged in a staring contest with Hu Niu. She saw how Hu Niu was so cute, and so reached forward to pick her up. Yet, because Hu Niu disliked strangers getting too close to her, she immediately bared her small white teeth, revealing a very defensive expression. "If you don't want to be bitten, I'd advise you to move your hand away," Ling Han said to Xuanhuan when he saw this happen out of the corner of his eyes. "I am in the second layer of element gathering tier. How could she manage to bite me?" Xuanhuan did not believe his advice and instead extended her hand to reach out for Hu Niu at a faster pace. Hu Niu was enraged. Suddenly, she gave a strike of her fingernails and a bite, her movements exceptionally quick. Xuanhuan hurriedly withdrew her hand, yet there had already appeared a bite mark on her fair, delicate hand. The pain almost caused her to tear up. Ling Han picked Hu Niu up to prevent her from taking advantage and pushing on with her attack. He laughed and said, "Even I have been bitten before. You, at the level of the second layer of element gathering tier, are really not that much." He turned back round and said to Hu Niu, "This is a friend, don't bite her again." Hu Niu held onto Ling Han's neck, tilted her head and continued to stare at Xuanhuan, her stare still ferocious. Zhu Hixin and Zhang Weishan could not help but ask about Hu Niu's origins. When they found out the whole story, they were truly amazed, and felt that this little girl was indeed extremely fortunate. Even after dropping into a tiger's lair, she had still managed to survive to such an age. While they were talking, Fu Yuanshen had led 7 people in, all of different ages. The oldest of them looked to be in his 70s, and the youngest was at least in his 40s. All of them had at least one silver badge hanging on their chests, and some even had 2. This meant they were all either black-grade low-level or black-grade mid-level alchemists. This is young Master Han, and we shall observe young Master Han concoct an alchemical pill later, Fu Yuansheng said. Hearing him say this, all 7 of the newcomers looked extremely surprised. Who were they? They were all black-grade alchemists, and in Rain Country, they could be considered very important people, with extremely high social status. If you were talking about concocting alchemical pills, they were naturally the ones who would be doing the teaching. What need was there for them to observe another person concocting pills? If the person they would be observing was either Fu Yuansheng or Wu Songling, that would be fine. As the only 2 black-grade high-level alchemists in Rain Country, these 2 men have naturally won the reverence and respect of all alchemists. But now, Fu Yuansheng actually wanted them to observe a young man concoct an alchemical pill. How could they accept that? Alchemists, belonging to an extremely rare and extremely important profession, caused everyone in this field to be extremely proud, and the higher their grade, the prouder they were. Immediately, there were a few of the alchemists who looked insulted and angered, but because of Fu Yuansheng's status, they did not lose their temper. Among them, one of the alchemists in his 40s could not hold himself back and said, "Pavilion Master, you're joking with us, right? You actually want us to observe a little guy concocting an alchemical pill?" He had something else that he had held himself back from saying. This brat couldn't be your illegitimate son, right? To command so many of us to come here to instruct him. Fu Yuansheng looked furious. In his opinion, being able to observe Ling Han in the process of concocting an alchemical pill was a once-in-a-lifetime chance. Under normal circumstances, what alchemist would easily allow others to watch him concoct pills? Moreover, Ling Han had even said that he would be enacting an alchemist's skill for their observation. If it was not for his determination and desperate desire to develop and advance the field of alchemy in Rain Country, then why else would he have called others here to observe? Heilin, apologize to young Master Han, he said immediately in a deep voice. What? That alchemist by the name of Heilin raised a brow, looking extremely disbelieving. I am a black-grade low-level alchemist. My status is so high and revered, yet you actually want me to apologize to a young boy like this? Pavilion Master, are you intending to use your public office to avenge private wrongs? How dare you? Zhu Hixin shouted instantly. His eyes were wide with rage, and he looked extremely furious. Both Ling Han and Fu Yuansheng were people he respected very much. Ha 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 ha. Heilin laughed loudly, with no hint of respect in his expression. He only gave a cold humph, and said, "Some things are better left unsaid." He was indeed not afraid of Fu Yuansheng, because his father, He Luo Yun, was also a black-grade high-level alchemist. Years ago, He Luo Yun and Fu Yuansheng were already rivals. They would be competing over everything, alchemy, martial arts. The 2 of them even fell in love with the same woman. In the end, He Luo Yun won the maiden's heart. And now, He Luo Yun already had 1 foot in the ranks of Earth-grade alchemists, and very soon, would be able to dominate fully over Fu Yuansheng. As a result, he naturally thought that Fu Yuansheng was deliberately beating down on him. Unable to win over his old man, he was actually seeking a feeling of superiority from his son. This was really too shameful. Fu Yuansheng was actually trembling with fury. His well-meant intentions actually got such a payback. Get out, Ling Han said coldly to Heilin, pointing at the door. Brat, how dare you actually speak to me this way? Heilin was stunned for a moment, before becoming enraged. Both Zhu Hixin and Zhang Weishan had stepped out to stand in front of Ling Han, glaring furiously at He Lin. Two dogs that don't know what's good for you. He Ling humped coldly. I was intending to leave, even if you don't drive me out. Actually watching a wet behind the ears brat concoct an alchemical pill, pay. Ha, ha, ha. He spat and then gave 3 loud laughs, leaving with long strides. Alchemy Emperor of the Divine Tao. Chapter 107, Four Forms Seal. Fu Yuansheng's face flashed with different expressions very quickly. Finally, giving a long sigh, he said, though this man is a little arrogant, he does indeed have a talent in alchemy that corresponds with his level of arrogance. I had previously thought to gift him with a rare opportunity, yet never imagined that, AI. He raised his clasped hands in Ling Han's direction in apology and said, Young Master Han, please don't take his actions to heart. Ling Han smiled softly and said, it's fine. This time, because of Fu Yuansheng, he would not pursue the issue, but if He Lin dared to act so pompous in front of him again, he would definitely shatter all the teeth in the latter's mouth. Then let's begin. Fu Yuansheng had already brought all the medicinal ingredients Ling Han had requested for, and Ling Han had also taken out the second star grass. All the people here were black-grade alchemists, so how could they not recognize the second star grass? A few of them instantly looked resentful. They were actually called here to observe a young junior concoct the refreshing pill. This was practically an insult to them. Unfortunately, they did not have a father who was also a black-grade high-level alchemist. Thus, though they were slightly displeased with Fu Yuansheng's actions, they dared not express that displeasure. However, their faces had all turned a bit sour. When Zhu Hixin and Zhang Weishan saw the behavior of the others, both of them felt the urge to draw out their weapons to drive these people out. They actually dared to doubt young Master Han. At the same time, Zhang Weishan also felt a bit of shame, for he had also doubted Ling Han before. Ling Han did not bother himself with worrying over what the others were thinking. As the Alchemy Emperor, what need was there for him to obtain the respect of other alchemists? He grabbed the alchemy furnace and began to toss various medicinal ingredients into it. Does this brat actually know how to concoct alchemical pills? How can he simply toss in so many different ingredients all at once? That's right. The first step of the concoction process is purification, and different ingredients require different levels of heat to be purified. If they are all thrown in at once, the only result would be that all ingredients would be damaged. Forget it. Just take it as wasting a bit of our time. A few of the alchemists present could not hold themselves back from mumbling complaints to each other quietly. It was not that they did not trust Fu Yuansheng, just that Ling Han was really too young. Moreover, in their eyes, his actions were simply too reckless. They were not the only ones feeling doubtful. Even Fu Yuansheng, Zhu Hixin, and Zhang Weishan were extremely surprised, for the purification of the medicinal ingredients was the first step to concocting an alchemical pill. It was also a very crucial step. Could it be that Ling Han would cause a mess up from the very first step? It was really too bad that Li Si-chan was not present. She had previously watched the whole process of Ling Han concocting an alchemical pill from start to finish. Purification was only a piece of cake to him. After tossing in 7 different ingredients, Ling Han's hands trembled, and instantly, flames gushed out. His figure began to circle around the furnace and struck the furnace with his palms repeatedly. Weng, 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 tong, tong, tong. From within the furnace, steam instantly gushed out. A herbal fragrance also began to spread out within the room. What? All of the alchemists in the room widened their eyes in shock at the exact same moment, expressions of absolute disbelief on their faces. They all looked as if they had just seen a ghostly apparition. Master, what's wrong with all of you? Qi Zhantai asked in confusion. She had just barely entered into the field of alchemy, and had only just learnt the basic theoretical knowledge, thus she had no idea what everyone was so flabbergasted about. Gods, 7 different ingredients really can be purified at the same time, am I dreaming? One of them gasped in shock before Zhang Weishan could manage to answer. All of these 7 ingredients require different temperatures to be purified, and it should have been impossible to purify them all at once. But this brat used a very intriguing technique. It seems like he has split a single furnace into 7 parts, and the temperature in each separate part is different, allowing for the simultaneous purification of these 7 ingredients to be possible. Amazing. They slowly regained their composure, though their faces still could not hide the admiration they were feeling. But this does not appear to have much meaning, one of the alchemists said hesitatingly after a while. After all, he was not capable of accomplishing such a feat, so the tone he used to voice out his evaluation lacked a bit of confidence. Indeed, even Fu Yuansheng nodded. Being able to purify all 7 ingredients at the same time is indeed an amazing ability, but to purify the ingredients one by one would only expend a bit more time. He pointed out in his own evaluation. This was what would be called a flashy but useless move, for if there was even the slightest bit of a mistake in the process of purifying all 7 ingredients simultaneously, that would mean that all 7 ingredients would have gone to waste. No. Fu Yuansheng suddenly shook his head, his eyes wide. How could this herbal aroma be so strong? When he brought this up, the others all looked as if they had come to a sudden realization, and consequently, looked very astonished. As black-grade alchemists, the number of times they had purified medicinal ingredients in preparation for the concoction process was uncountable. They were especially familiar with those medicinal ingredients that were frequently used in alchemy. But when they smelled this herbal aroma that was currently spreading out in the room, it was obviously very different from the aroma that was produced when they had purified ingredients in the past. The stronger the herbal aroma was, the purer the essence of the medicinal ingredients produced from the purification it indicated. Also, when the alchemist advanced to the actual concoction process, the success rate of concocting the alchemical pill would be much higher as well. It was a very simple logic. The fewer impurities there were, the less interference there would be with the actual concoction process. But the problem was that as far as these black-grade alchemists were concerned, the purification process was already improved to its limits. There was no room for even the slightest bit of improvement anymore, yet why was it that the medicinal essence that Ling Han had obtained from his purification was so much purer than their own? Could it be that this was why all 7 ingredients had to be purified at the same time? That is the only possibility. That's right. I've heard a senior of mine tell me before that in ancient times, the really capable alchemists were able to purify various medicinal ingredients all at the same time, taking advantage of the mutual effects of the different ingredients to make it possible for the medicinal essence derived from the purification process to be even purer. Could that actually be true? Hiss. Now, everyone could no longer remain calm. Whether the purification process took a longer or shorter time was not something that anyone would really bother about. After all, it was just a bit more or a bit less time. But if it was possible to actually increase the purity of the medicinal ingredients through the purification process, that would be an astonishing feat, and an immeasurably valuable contribution to the field of alchemy. All of them could not help feeling remorse secretly. Because they had all thought that there was not much significance to this step, they had missed a lot of Ling Han's moves and techniques. Thankfully, there was still a lot of ingredients left over, so Ling Han would obviously be repeating the purification process. All 9 of them opened their eyes wide, not daring to miss any single movement of Ling Han anymore. Chizantai was very bored, but there were too many important people here, so she did not even dare to breathe too loudly. Ling Han was very focused. After purifying all of the ingredients, he began the concoction process of the second star pill. The technique he had used was called the 4 forms seal. It was very effective in controlling the heat of the flames. In his last life, this control technique was also extremely impressive, and found a very widespread use in the field of alchemy at the time. Because he himself had been an alchemist in his last life, Ling Han could not bear watching the field of alchemy degrade to such an extent. Thus, he did not mind imparting relevant knowledge of alchemy at appropriate times to improve the overall level of alchemy in this age. While he continued to concoct the alchemical pill, he also spoke about the key details and features of the Four Forms seal. All of the alchemists present, including Fu Yuansheng himself, behaved like they were absolute newbies to the art, listening attentively to his lecture with their faces filled with utter reverence. If this scene had been witnessed by others, they would definitely go crazy. It could be argued that all of the most capable alchemists of Rain Country were gathered here, yet they were all very seriously observing a young man concocting an alchemical pill. There was indeed no age limit to learning. Whoever's capable would be the teacher. When Ling Han had finished the process of concocting the second star pill, all of the 9 alchemists were deeply engrossed in comprehending and figuring out the workings of the Four Forms seal. They were all sitting cross-legged on the floor. Occasionally, it would appear that they were in pensive thought, and sometimes one of them would strike at the air with a palm. They were all trying to digest as much of Ling Han's lecture as possible. "Let's go and eat some meat." Ling Han smiled faintly, and picked Xuanhuan up. He looked very pleased, because he had managed to concoct 7 second star pills this time, and this would allow his divine sense to improve a considerable amount. Xuanhuan was instantly happy. Her favorite activity was eating. "I'm going to," Xuanhuan said quickly. She was really too bored. Alchemy Emperor of the Divine Tao. Chapter 108, Third Imperial Prince. Ling Han, carrying Xuanhuan in his arms, stepped out of the room with Xuanhuan accompanying them. However, Fu Yuansheng was still a powerful warrior of spiritual pedestal tier after all. At the very moment the group of 3 stepped out the door, he immediately came back to reality, and with a quick leap exited as well and said, "Young Master Han, are you leaving?" My role's over, so of course I'm leaving." Ling Han waved around the pill bottle that contained the 7 second star pills, looking very pleased. "Please allow me to see you off, young Master Han," Fu Yuansheng said in a very sincere tone. He was already completely convinced by Ling Han's incredible skill in alchemy. Ling Han smiled and nodded. If Fu Yuansheng wanted to see him off, that was fine with him. They walked down the stairs, and right when they reached the beginning of the stairs, a servant boy approached and said, "Pavilion Master, the Third Imperial Prince expressed his wish to meet with you." Oh, Fu Yuansheng stared blankly for a moment, then said, "I was just about to go down, so don't concern yourself with this anymore." Understood. The servant boy nodded quickly. He had just spotted Ling Han and Xuanhuan, which caused him to be lost for words, because they actually had Fu Yuansheng leading them downstairs, which was an extreme shock to him. That was Fu Yuansheng, one of the few most powerful and most respected people of Rain Country. The 3 of them soon arrived at the ground floor and saw there was a young man and woman standing there. The 2 of them were standing upright, showing absolutely no sign of impatience. The man and the woman both seemed to be about 25 or 26 years old. The man was quite tall and had thick, black locks. His eyes were bright and expressive, and held a penetrating gaze as if he could look into the secrets hidden in the deepest parts of the heart of anyone his gaze fell upon. The woman had a very shapely, tempting figure, one able to cause any normal man's mouth to start watering. Her face was very beautiful and her skin was as fair as white jade. Her hair was actually an unusual crimson shade of fire, which granted her a very unique charm. The man was naturally the Third Imperial Prince, Xuanhuan, but who was this woman? Ling Han was slightly surprised, because this woman was astonishingly in gushing spring tier. In Rain Country, this kind of a small place, a martial artist that had managed to reach gushing spring tier before reaching 30 years old had indeed made an astonishing accomplishment. She definitely could be categorized as a genius. Pavilion Master. The Third Imperial Prince performed the proper formalities of greeting an elder upon seeing Fu Yuansheng. It was true that he was an imperial prince, but even if he had inherited the throne and was crowned the emperor someday, he would still have to treat Fu Yuansheng with utmost politeness and courtesy. Xuanhuan hereby greets Third Elder Imperial Brother. Xuanhuan bowed slightly to greet the Third Imperial Prince. Wait here for a moment. Just let me see off this very honored guest first, Fu Yuansheng said, nodding at the Third Imperial Prince. Very honored guest. The third imperial prince could not help casting his gaze at Ling Han, because there were only 3 people standing behind Fu Yuansheng. Xuanhuan belonged to the royal house of the Da Yuan king, so naturally it was not possible that she would be worth such prioritized treatment from Fu Yuansheng, and Hu Niu was too small. This young man, who was he that he was addressed by Fu Yuansheng as very honored guest, and make Fu Yuansheng actually personally see him off? That was strange. He had obviously gotten hold of all the relevant, important intel of the imperial city, so how was it possible that such an awesome character would suddenly appear out of nowhere? Please go ahead, Pavilion Master, he said quickly. As Fu Yuansheng escorted Ling Han out the door, he kept repeatedly inviting him to frequently come over and visit him at the Heaven's Medicine Pavilion before finally turning back round and leaving. He seemed to be slightly impatient. He was very much in a rush to study the 4 forms seal closely. Ling Han walked together with Xuanhuan, while Hu Niu waved her little hands around excitedly, and kept saying, meet. 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 That brother ahead. The third imperial prince had caught up with them. Ling Han paused and looked over at the third imperial prince, and said, yes. Wasn't the third imperial prince looking for Fu Yuansheng? Why had he chased after them? The answer was very simple. There has suddenly appeared a person that even Fu Yuansheng would respectfully escort in the imperial city. As the third imperial prince, he would of course want to get to know this kind of person at the first opportunity. One had to understand that the Reign Emperor had 17 sons in total. Out of these 17 sons, there were at least 5 that were qualified to compete for the throne. The third imperial prince would naturally befriend capable people with utmost patience in order to accumulate a power base for the day when he would be joining in the competition for the throne. I am Xuanhuan. If I may ask, could you tell me your respected name, brother? The third imperial prince behaved in an extraordinarily polite manner. Ling Han smiled faintly, and said, my name is Ling Han. Brother Ling, I still have some matters to deal with, so it is really not convenient for me to talk too long. I hope that Brother Ling will accept this item as a gift from me. I believe that, in this imperial city, a lot of people would give you a bit of face because of this item. The third imperial prince handed over a violet-shaped badge. Thank you. Ling Han did not make any pretenses of modesty and accepted the badge from the third imperial prince. Brother Ling, when I am done dealing with these matters, I will definitely seek you out for a chat, the third imperial prince said, raising his clasped hands in Ling Han's direction before once again leaving in a rush with that beauty behind him. Ling Han smiled as he weighed the badge in his hand, and placed it into his pocket. Ling Han, this is a token of the third imperial prince. According to the rumors, the holder of this badge can eat at any restaurant of the imperial city and not pay a single cent. Everything will be paid for by the third imperial prince, Xuanhuan said enviously. Ling Han was stunned for a short moment, before suddenly breaking out into loud laughter. Xuanhuan was curious, so naturally asked him why he had laughed. I think that the third imperial prince will definitely regret this, Ling Han said. Why? Because there's a real glutton right here, Ling Han said as he rubbed Hu Niu's head. Xuanhuan was still baffled. Hu Niu was just a little girl. Even if she ate from morning to night, how much could she eat? There really are good people in this world, Ling Han said ruefully. The 3 of them left to have a meal at a restaurant. When she saw Hu Niu's terrifying appetite, Xuanhuan finally began to worry about that clansman of hers. There was a real chance that Xuanhuan would be driven to poverty at the rate that Hu Niu ate. Huyang Academy, Feng Luo's room. Bastard, bastard, bastard. Wei Healer was pacing around in the room like a maniac, his eyes bloodshot, looking very surly. He finally stopped pacing, and said to Feng Luo, do you believe it? Do you believe it? Headmaster Wu actually expelled me from the alchemy department. Feng Luo's mouth twitched a few times. This was not the first time that Wei Healer had complained and grumbled to him. He counted internally, this should be the 37th, or was it the 38th time? Previously, he would still offer a bit of response and comfort Wei Healer a bit, but now he was completely not in the mood for it. Having lost Wu Songlin's regard, a mere yellow-grade low-level alchemist naturally would not be someone looked upon too seriously by him. It's all because of that bastard, that damn brat. Wei Healy's eyes looked like they were about to spit fire. He had been so glorious, able to boast and basking in the spotlight as a genius of alchemy. Even those from the royal or noble families had to treat him politely and with courtesy. But now, it was as if he had dropped down from this extremely high position all the way to the bottom of the pit. His future was bleak and dark. A person who had been chased out by Wu Songlin, what alchemist would still dare to take him in as a disciple? Moreover, alchemy skill depended very much on imparted knowledge. If it was simply dependent on self-learning, what could he even manage to accomplish? Which meant that he was completely done for. Feng Luo saw all this happen, and could not hold back a cold smile from turning up the corners of his lips before saying, "Young Master Wei, I have a suggestion that would really cause some serious trouble for that brat." He had lost a considerable number of teeth, so he was forced to speak with a lisp now. One had to cautiously decipher his words before being able to understand what he was trying to say. "Oh, what suggestion would that be?" Wei Healer immediately turned to look at him. The current him had lost practically everything, so he had become absolutely crazy. As long as he could get his revenge on Ling Han, he was willing to do whatever insane thing it was. "Here, it's this." Feng Luo took out a badge carved in the shape of a violet. "What's this?" Wei Healer said blankly. "This is a token of the third imperial prince," Feng Luo said with a very devious smirk. "This is something that the third imperial prince gifted to my brother. Tell me, if I said I lost this badge, yet this badge was discovered in Ling Han's place, how would the academy deal with him? And how would the third imperial prince react?" Wei Healy's eyes lit up in understanding. Frame Ling Han. Alchemy Emperor of the Divine Tao. Chapter 109, Framed. Ha 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 ha, theft is an evil, shameless act in the first place, what more when it actually involves the third imperial prince? Wei Healer could not hold himself back from laughing. At that time, even if the academy had no intention of pursuing the matter further, due to the involvement of the imperial family, even Wu Songlin's reputation would be of no use. Anything related to the imperial family was never small, and Ling Han actually dared to steal an item belonging to the third imperial prince. That was a definite pathway to death. However, there should still be a reason, right? Otherwise, what would a thief steal this thing for? Wei Healer asked, his laughter very quickly stopping. Feng Luo snickered, and said, "This is a token of the third imperial prince that he has only gifted to a rare few people. The holder of this token would be considered as a dear friend of the third imperial prince. It is not only a symbol of status and identity, it also means that all charges the holder incurred at any restaurant or inn in the imperial city would all be placed on the third imperial prince's tab." Yeah, Wei Healer looked extremely envious. Although he was a genius of alchemy, he had not managed to obtain the third imperial prince's favor, and wasn't gifted with such a priceless token. Now actually seeing a profligate, spoiled young master holding onto one, how could he not be envious? Feng Luo smiled very proudly. This was given to him by Feng Yan, who had feared that his little brother would get into trouble in the imperial city. If Feng Luo possessed a token of the third imperial prince, then no matter who it was, they would have to give the third imperial prince some face. He patted Wei Healy's shoulder and said, "Young Master Wei, the task of framing Ling Han would be your job." Me. Wei Healy looked troubled at this. He only knew how to concoct alchemical pills, play around and show off, but framing someone was something he had never done before. Moreover, in the past, there were too many people who wanted to curry his favor, so no matter what job he wanted done, he only needed to say it and there would be someone willing to do that job for him. When had he ever needed to personally do anything? "What is it? Are you not willing?" Feng Luo smiled coldly. He pretended to put away the token, then just forget about it. "I just wanted to help you vent your anger in the first place, but since you're unwilling to do it, then I will not force you either." Wait. Wahila hurriedly called out, gritted his teeth, and said, I'll do it. He was extremely embittered in his heart. He had offended Ling Han, but wasn't it all because he had stood up for Feng Luo? But now this guy actually said he wanted to help him vent his anger, and then he was really turning his back on him, absolutely heartless. But after he had been abandoned by Wu Songlin, he was no longer that young Master Wei of old, but only a mere yellow-grade low-level alchemist. What right did he have to go against Feng Luo? Feng Luo had a genius of martial arts standing behind him that could vaguely be close to the level of absolute geniuses like the Third Imperial Prince and Kan Yi. Because of his brother, Feng Luo's own future prospects would be immeasurable. How was a down-and-out alchemist like him supposed to compare with that? Due to his current dire circumstances, Wei could only bow his head in acquiescence. If he dared to refuse Feng Luo now, that would mean cutting off his only chance for a bright future. If he followed after Feng Luo, he could possibly leave Rain Country in the future, and thus get out of Wu Songlin's shadow. He accepted the violet-shaped badge and silently walked to Feng Luo's side. His hands were lowered at his sides, obviously placing his position at a lower level than the latter. Ha 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 ha. Feng Luo laughed loudly, his face filled with pride. Even his brother had never thought that he would be able to take a slightly talented alchemist into his camp, had he? Let's see who dared to still say that he was a spoiled young master. Why don't you try taking in a yellow-grade alchemist to show your own ability? Wahila lowered his head, his eyes filled with hatred and regret. But things have already advanced to this step, there was no way he would be able to return things to how they were before. After enjoying a meal with Ling Han, Chizantai naturally returned to the Heaven's Medicine Pavilion, while Ling Han brought Hu Niu for another walk around the shops and bought some materials to set up the restrictions around his courtyard. He then returned to the academy. He was now not in much of a rush to take the second star pill. His priority now was to set up certain restrictions in the surrounding area of his courtyard. This was an early warning system. If anyone intruded into the courtyard, they would definitely disturb the restrictions in place, which would then release an alarm that only he could sense. Even if he was not in the room, there would still be clues left behind that would tell him that an intruder had broken into his courtyard. There was nothing to be done about it. He had very limited materials on hand, so he could only set up such simple restrictions. If it was in his last life, possibly not even powerful warriors of Heaven Tier would dare to barge through the restrictions he could set up. I'll just have to make use of whatever is available to me. I don't have any enemies now anyways, he murmured. If Lu Yutong, Qi Yongyi, and the others had heard his words, they would definitely jump out in objection. No enemies. He really dared to say that. Hu Bo was one, Feng Yan was another, He Jun Chen could also be considered as one, and there was also Nangong Ji. All these people were not easily trifled with, especially Hu Bo and Feng Yan. Hu Bo was a young master of the main line of the Hu clan, and Feng Yan was a genius of martial arts that had the potential to become a ruler. If these people were still not considered enemies, then who would Ling Han actually consider enemies? Unfortunately, they did not know that while Ling Han's current cultivation level was very weak, there was still the pride of a powerful warrior of Heaven Tier in his bones. How could he actually take these small rascals seriously? Furthermore, in his last life, he had the same kind of attitude, possessing a deep-set pride within him. He would never bow his head to anyone. The restriction was extremely simple, so Ling Han did not expend too much time on setting it up. After that, he swallowed a second star pill, and began to strengthen his divine sense. From what Ling Han knew, there was no cultivation technique in this world that could strengthen divine sense. Only when the cultivation level rises would a martial artist's divine sense advance to the next level. This was a very passive process. For example, when he was still in Heaven Tier in his last life, his soul only needed to tremble slightly, and he could even directly erase the soul of a powerful warrior of spiritual infant tier. But he had always suspected that since divine sense could be recovered through cultivation techniques and strengthened with the use of alchemical pills or divine medicine, then it should also be possible to cultivate divine sense through cultivation techniques. The only thing was that this kind of cultivation technique was not discovered yet. This was not impossible. After all, if it was not for the fact that he had come from 10,000 years in the past, how would he have known that there were so many pill formulae that had been lost in the passage of time now? Obviously, there is a lot of good stuff that has been lost on the pages of history. Since it was like this in his current lifetime, then how could his last life be an exception to this theory? A very real example was seen from the very last period of his last life, when he had visited various ancient historical sites from which he had obtained a few ancient pill formulae, which could all be considered to belong to the category of lost with time. Thus, perhaps many, many years ago there may have been a cultivation technique that was meant to refine one's divine sense. As he pondered, he was still absorbing the medicinal effects of the second star pill. He suddenly felt very comfortable, for the soul was responsible for all the feelings and sensations of the body. Now that his divine sense was strengthened, he would of course feel an indescribable invigoration. One after another, very soon, he had taken all 7 second star pills. My soul is almost twice as strong now. Ling Han's eyes snapped open. His eyes had become even deeper than before, as if they were twin bottomless pits, causing anyone who looked into his eyes unable to help but fall deeply into them. He smiled. This is a benefit of strengthening my divine sense. Using my divine sense to dominate over my opponent could be considered as my unique move. If my opponent has no defense against this kind of attack, then there is a high chance that I could kill him in an instant. The current strength of my soul should be equivalent to the cultivation level of gushing spring tear. His smile grew wider. This means that I would be able to absorb spiritual chi at the rate of a martial artist of gushing spring tear for my cultivation, and together with my immortal grade spirit base, the rate of advance of my cultivation level would probably shock even me. I have to quickly reach gushing spring tear. Only when I have reached gushing spring tear will I be able to practice black grade cultivation techniques. That is the real beginning to the path of martial arts. Now, I am filled with advanced, high-level knowledge, yet have no ability to make use of what I have. This kind of feeling is really horrible. A rat has sneaked in. Alchemy Emperor of the Divine Tao. Chapter 110. Dropping in. Ling Han really had not thought that this would happen. He had just barely set up the restriction around his courtyard, and he already had a night visitor coming in for a visit. One has to understand that the place he was occupying now could actually be considered a haunted house, a place no one would be living in. If one argued that there so happened to be a burglar who had no understanding of the inner workings of the academy and somehow stumbled onto this place to commit theft, then the possibility of this happening was really too low. Who could this thief be? Russell, who knew, suddenly stood up. She had the alert senses of a wild beast. Her nose might be even more powerful than a dog's, and she may have already caught the scent of the thief. Shush. Ling Han gestured her to stay quiet. He had no desire to scare off the thief. He wanted to know why the latter had come first. Who knew was firmly ensconced in his hold, and she immediately became quiet. However, her eyes still brimmed with a baleful look. In her beast-like way of looking at the world, this was her territory, and anyone who dared to trespass, whoever it was, should be bitten to death. A dark figure made their way inside, yet did not move around everywhere. They only walked around the living room once before fumbling about a table a few times. After a while, the intruder turned around and left quietly. A sliver of a smile crossed the corners of Ling Han's lips. At the instant the intruder had left, Ling Han had taken advantage of the moonlight to clearly see the face of the intruder. Wei Healer. Ling Han walked into the living room, lit a candle, and approached the table. There was a wooden box on the table, and inside lay a few cheap little trinkets. When he opened the box, he saw that there was something new within. A badge carved in the shape of a violet. This is... Ling Han could not hold back a strange smile as he took out another violet-shaped badge from within his pocket. This had been gifted to him by the third imperial prince. Now he had 2 such badges. Why had Wei Healer secretly stuffed a violet badge into his hands? Oh, instantly, he understood what was going on here. This was an attempt to set him up. There would definitely be someone who would be reporting having lost the item, and Wei Healer would lead people to his place. Naturally, they would find the lost item here, and by that time, there was no way he would be able to escape being accused of theft. Moreover, the stolen item was even a token of the third imperial prince. No one would dare to suppress this issue, and by that time, the lightest punishment he would get would be expulsion from the academy, but it was another story whether the third imperial prince would send his own people to deal with him or not. The unfortunate thing was that Wei Healer would never have imagined that he would have coincidentally encountered the third imperial prince today. He had even been presented with a violet badge from the latter. However, even if he had not met the third imperial prince today, since he had discovered the existence of this scheme, there was no way that he could still be successfully set up. Since you want to play, then I'll play with you a bit. Ling Han smiled calmly, and replaced the lid of the box, having no intention at all to remove that badge from within. A cold gleam flashed through his eyes. Since there was someone who wanted to die so desperately, then he would just have to let him die. He returned to the inner chambers and began cultivation. After his divine sense had been strengthened, the efficiency of his cultivation had risen to a whole new level. As massive amounts of spiritual chi gushed into him, it was all absorbed by his 5 elements mix chaos lotus, and with the strict control granted to him by his powerful divine sense, this spiritual chi was swiftly converted into origin power to strengthen his origin nuclei. Originally, I would have needed around a month to rise to the next layer, but with how things are now, probably half a month would be enough, Ling Han smiled. After his divine sense was completely exhausted, he began to cultivate the Indestructible Heaven Scroll in order to advance from body of dead tree to body of rock cliff. When he has completely grasped body of rock cliff, he'd be able to parry sharp weaponry with his bare hands. The sturdiness of his physical body would become even more terrifying than that of some races with exceptionally powerful natural defense. When he had finished cultivation, there had already appeared a sliver of white in the east. It was only now that he lay down to rest. Meditation could substitute for a part of the sleep he needed. Thus, he only needed to sleep for 1 or 2 hours, and it would be enough for him to be energetic for the rest of the day. When dawn came the next day, he went over to Mo Jie's courtyard to discuss the art of the sword with him again. One of them was an expert in the art of the sword, while the other had an exceptionally high level of comprehension, and so naturally they would be able to use each other as reference and thus improve themselves. They had only experienced 2 discussions with each other, yet the benefits both had received were quite deep. Peng, peng, peng. Just when the 2 of them were embroiled in a fierce discussion, they heard someone banging on the door which rudely interrupted their conversation. Mo Gao suddenly looked extremely displeased. His fondness for the art of the sword had almost reached the level of insanity. Once he was embroiled in a discussion about sword techniques, even if it was the gods themselves here for a visit, he would ignore them. He walked over to the entrance, opened the door, and saw that there were over 10 people standing at his doorway. Is Ling Han here? A young man dressed in green-colored long robes took 1 step forward, his chin proudly raised, looking extremely arrogant in his demeanor. However, he did have the right to be arrogant, for he was astonishingly in gushing spring tier, a much more powerful martial artist than even Mo Gao. Who are you people, and what are you looking for my student for? Mo Gao questioned instead of stepping out of their way and allowing them entry. Teacher Mo, we are members of the discipline committee. Another young man dressed in black walked forwards, though his tone was much more even. Of course, this had something to do with his cultivation level, because he was similarly in element gathering tier, so he did not have much of an advantage over Mo Gao in terms of cultivation level. Don't speak so much nonsense, tell Ling Han to come out quickly. The young man in green robes shouted impatiently, with no hint of caring about Mo Gao. Mo Gao stared blankly for a moment, and then said, "What offense has my student committed that requires the discipline committee to take action?" The Discipline Committee, as the name suggested, was an organization that was in charge of enforcing the rules and regulations of the academy. However, the majority of the members of this committee were students, and it could also be considered as a type of part-time job, for the members could earn academic points. Moreover, the members also possessed a considerable amount of power in the academy, so quite a lot of students desperately thought up ways to squeeze themselves into the committee. We suspect that he is involved with a crime of theft, so there is a need for us to search him and his room. Teacher Mo, you aren't thinking of covering for a criminal, are you? The green-clad young man said coldly, showing no respect to Mogao at all. Nonsense. Mogao was instantly enraged. In his heart, the sword was the most sacred existence in this world, and Ling Han had such a high talent in the art of the sword. The sword would reflect the swordsman's heart. How could such a person be a thief? Get lost. He raised his hand and pointed at him furiously, almost about to draw his sword in ire. Mogao, even if you're a teacher of the academy, you still have no right to cover for a criminal. The green-clad young man said, his eyes passing over Mogao to look into the courtyard. Get out of my way, or else I will apprehend you on the basis of obstructing law enforcement. Mogao was so angry his whole body was shaking. He was a teacher of the academy, yet he was actually now berated and insulted by a mere student. His right hand was already lying on the hilt of his sword, a cold light shining from his eyes, ready to make his move. Teacher Mo. Ling Han walked over to them, smiled softly at Mogao, and said, since they're here to look for me, then just let me deal with this matter. Mogao hesitated for a moment, but still lowered his right hand from the hilt of his sword. He would of course not simply watch as his own student was bullied by others, but he too wanted to know what was really going on here. Ling Han's eyes swept over the entourage, and a smile of realization played about his lips. In this group of over 10 people, he had recognized 2 of them to be Feng Luo and Wei Healer. He opened his mouth to say, these 2 should not be members of the discipline committee, right? They are indeed not, for they are the ones who reported the loss, the green-clad young man said, his eyes fixed in a stare at Ling Han. Let me advise you not to have any delusions. In front of me, there is no one who can conceal their crime. End of the chapter. Alchemy Emperor of the Divine Tao will be read in 5 chapters for every Monday, Wednesday, Friday and Sunday. Please leave this sound novel and press subscribe, follow, and the bell so you don't miss any new clips as well. See you.